Some of us believe in ghosts. Some of us know someone who does. Some of us have been alone in a room and we've seen something move, a curtain, close in a closet, and we felt our hearts start to race. And most of us, if not all of us, have heard a ghost story. True or untrue, ghost stories have had a foothold in American culture since the 19th century. And today I'd like to explore how the tradition of the American ghost story got its start, why these stories are told, and how they've impacted modern popular media. We'll begin at the beginning, the advent of the ghost story in popular literature. In the 1820s and 30s, several things happened at once to impact American publishing. Postal routes became cheaper, railroad networks were developed, and advancements were made in publishing technology. So that mass publication was more affordable than ever. At the same time, the American population had been steadily increasing so that by the mid-1800s, the number of literate Americans was higher than ever. At the same time, the European Gothic tradition was making its influence felt. Edgar Allan Poe adapted the technique of this style flawlessly to American literature in his story, The Fall of the House of Usher. Other influences on authors of ghost stories at this time were massive changes in spiritual and religious ideologies due to things like Darwinism and the advent of new scientific, industrial, and technological advances. The ghost story, then, was a symptom of a changing consciousness and an opportunity to speak to these changes, which brings us to our second point. Why are ghost stories told? According to Dr. James Andrew Weinstock, a professor of English at Central Michigan University, men often use the ghost story to raise epistemological and ontological questions about the abilities of human beings to adequately rationalize their universe, while works by women frequently dealt with the terrors of the known world, the constraints upon women living in a society controlled by men. The ghost story serves as an outlet for concerns about the afterlife, morality, and especially about those issues affecting minority groups. Women in the late 19th and early 20th century used the ghost story to talk about the pressures of home life and raising a family, as well as societal obligations like staying in a bad marriage. After the supposed decline of the ghost story following the Great Depression and all the changes that it wrought, women and other minority groups were responsible for the resurgence of the ghost story in the 21st century. Toni Morrison and Joyce Carol Oates are examples. In these stories, the ghosts become a metaphor for the minority and the ways in which they're forcibly erased, either by assimilation or by those who would prefer their absence. These stories allowed those whose voices would have otherwise been muffled to speak out. And they united people in much the same way that the ghost stories of my childhood made me feel closer to my peers and the wider world. This ability to bring people together brings us to our third and final point, the influence of the ghost story on popular media. The fear of ghosts is almost wholly universal, and if it isn't, the deeper fears and emotional struggles they represent bridge the gap. The power of this fear and the power of storytelling to weave a kind of cultural fabric makes for a doubly powerful influence on popular media. There are entire websites that have anthologized American ghost stories. AmericanFolklore.net is an example, and there are an endless number of movies: The Sixth Sense, Poltergeist, The Ring, and there are even reality shows dedicated to ghost hunting and a number of ghost tours in several American cities where ghost stories are used to attract tourists. On a class field trip to DC in middle school, a bunch of my peers got to go on one. I remember that best because it was the one story they kept telling once they came back, in much the same way that I would always tell ghost stories to my fellow students on the playground in elementary school. The ghost story, then, born in the 19th century out of the eagerness of new publishers and authors, developed into a tool for cultural expression, and has since allowed us to communicate and come together in this joint effort to scare each other. And it's entertained us and let us turn our fears about the future and our history on their heads into something that we can scream at and laugh at. And it is, after all, as Dr. Weinstock also said, to be haunted is an unavoidable corollary of being human. And the ghost story, then, is just as unavoidable.